One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases, and is the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. It's early morning down here in Mexico. We're in Nuevo Vallarta for a week, our very first time in Mexico, and I have to say I'm enjoying it quite a bit. So I thought that I would get this podcast done and out before we headed out for today's activities. And this might be the last episode in the Longevity and Healthspan series. And chances are, once I do close this one out, I'm going to pivot into a more expanded discussion of some of the things that we're going to talk about today. And I want to end the mini-series by talking about the top predictors of longevity. Because as they say, you can't fix a problem that you don't know exists. And I guess I could assume that if you're listening to this episode, you are concerned about longevity and health span. But it's one thing to connect with an idea in your mind, to connect to it intellectually. It's a different thing altogether when that idea connects on an emotional basis, which is, quite a bit deeper. And here's what I mean by this. Like several years ago, and this guy's still a client of mine, this gentleman came to me. He hadn't yet turned 60, but he was concerned because his father had died in his early 60s from a sudden and unexpected heart attack. And this guy himself was, he was in pretty good shape. He really didn't have any health issues, but he was getting scared. Right in his mind, early death from a sudden and unexpected heart attack like his father was a real and present danger. And so he came to me to do a thorough cardiovascular assessment. And I'm, happy to say he's several years beyond at this point where his father had passed away. With his concern, he wasn't really far off from the truth, because it turns out that one of the most significant predictors of longevity, or let me say it this way, one of the most significant predictors of early heart disease is your family history. That's why this guy was so concerned. And closely related to that is that one of the top predictors of longevity is having a parent who has lived a long life. If you go online, you can find longevity calculators that are published by some life insurance companies. And they put them out, a series of questions. They predict how long you're going to live based on how you answer that. And one of the questions they ask is whether or not you have a parent who's lived past, say, the age of 80. Because having a parent who's lived beyond 80 is predictive for you doing the same thing. Now, just because one or both of your parents have lived beyond the age of 80, which is more than the average lifespan, right? 76, 77 years old is the worldwide average these days, something like that. But again, just because one or both of your parents lives beyond the age of 80 doesn't mean that you will too, because your longevity is tied up not just in your genetics and your heritability, but significantly influenced by the choices that you've made summed up over your lifetime. So, theoretically, you can have somebody whose both parents died very young, but they live for a very long span because they've made different choices. And the reverse is true as well. You might have parents in their 80s, 90s, maybe centenarians, and you might have an individual person die in their 60s because of the choices that they've made. So genetics plays a role, but as we've talked about before, it's a fraction of the impact of your diet, your lifestyle, your choices, and how that interacts with your genetics, right? So I don't want you to rest on your laurels. I don't want you to think that just because you have parents who are or were long-lived, that means that you can ignore everything that we talked about so far in this mini-series about longevity and health and wellness. So family history of a long-lived parent is one of the best predictors for longevity, but it's not the only one. The others, which we'll talk about today, at least in brief, are things like your cardiorespiratory capacity, coupled with some metrics of strength, mobility, and balance. And I'm going to take those in reverse order. We'll talk about mobility and balance first. And this is not going to be a deep dive into these things, but I'm considering doing individual mini-series about each of these different things. But, like I said, this episode is going to serve to perhaps close the talk on longevity and then introduce another mini series where we'll probably break these down in more detail for you. So let's start with mobility and balance first. Mobility and balance are different aspects of human movement, but they're very much related to each other. If we borrow definitions, say, from the field of physiotherapy, mobility is roughly defined as your ability to move about your physical environment, right? Just to get up and go. But in order to do that safely, you have to have balance. And so the two, again, are interconnected. And balance is the ability to maintain your position, either statically while you're standing still, for example, or while you're moving. And in the absence of some kind of injury, as we age, we tend to lose balance, perhaps before we lose mobility, but the changes can be very subtle. And the reason for that is that we have an amazing, and particularly our brains have an amazing capacity to adapt to and reduce, or I'm sorry, to adapt to reduced balance control by changing our gait and our posture. For example, as we lose balance and control of position in subtle ways, we might widen our stance very slightly. We might slow down and be more deliberate about where we place our feet. We might look down at the floor while we walk to give us better visual cues, or we might use a handrail or intermittently touch a wall or the furniture as we walk around an environment to give us some kind of a tactile cue. And if you've ever struggled to stand on one leg, you know that all it takes is just, touching one finger on a table that might be next to you to give you the stability that you need to balance on one foot. So we lose balance over time unless we intentionally do things to maintain that. And we subconsciously adapt to poor balance or loss of balance incrementally in such ways that we don't really notice it in our daily lives unless we challenge it specifically. And you can imagine that, the worst outcome is the loss of both mobility and balance, leading to the risk of a fall where someone might break a hip and end up in the hospital. And if you know the statistics on this, especially for the elderly, breaking a hip and landing in the hospital, the outcome of those scenarios, it's not good, right? You don't want to end up in that place. One thing to note here is that as we mature from childhood to adulthood, our movement patterns and the demands that those things place on our brains and our balance system, which is really, it's neurological anyways, um, our movement patterns change radically, right? When we're young, we hop, we skip, we jump, we twist, we twirl, we tumble, we jump up, we squat down, we're on the ground, we're up again, we move forwards, we move backwards, and we move sideways. I'm sure I forgot a few things, but you get the point. We move in 3 dimensions when we're young. But at some point, all of that changes. And as adults, we live our lives in one direction, right? Straight and forward. And what's worse, we change from being active on a daily basis to being mostly sedentary, which means we lose mobility and balance incrementally year after year, decade after decade. Now, you individually might be completely different. You might be in a job that requires you to be on your feet all day and to move in different patterns other than just straight forward and back. But the average adult in industrial societies is typically sedentary, and we live our lives in one direction. We sit a lot and we get up and we move straight forward, and we no longer do all the things that challenge our balance systems and challenge our brains as we do when we were younger. So, the solution here is not necessarily to get up and go join an adult gymnastics club, although they do exist, and that's not necessarily a bad idea, right? But the solution is to first convince yourself that you have lost some degree of balance and mobility and to start to take some kind of corrective action. And here's one thing that you can do on your own at home. First and foremost, and I'm just going to walk you through some basic things that we use in the world of functional neurology to do how do I phrase this? Without using technical equipment to do a simple balance assessment. These are things that you can do on your own. So first and foremost, make sure that you have an open space. If you choose to do this, number one, you're on your own, right? Just do this at your own risk, but make sure you have a big open space to do this. Be smart If your balance fails and you take a spill, you don't want to hit your head on a coffee table or something else, right? Just be smart, take precautions. Your first challenge, or the first thing for you to look for in yourself, is to stand up, just look straight across the room, and simply stand on one leg without touching anything. Don't touch anything with your arms. Um, and with your elevated leg, let's say you're standing on your right leg and you pick up your left leg, don't let your left foot touch your right leg, right? There's a yoga pose, I can't remember what it's called, where you stand on one leg but you're, again, if you're on your right, you stand on your right leg, your left leg is up, and you put your left foot against your right calf, for example. Don't do that. Have your elevated leg to be free, just hanging in the air. Let your arms hang by your side, and just simply count how many seconds that you can stand. And the goal is to be rock steady. I don't mean, success is not standing for 30 seconds on one leg, but you're wobbling all over the place. That's indicative of a balance issue. But if you are truly rock steady and you can last at least 30 seconds, that's great. Try the other leg and see if the balance on one leg is equal from left to the right, because quite often it's not. Quite often we have one side where the balance is great and the second side is not. The next challenge is to do the same thing, right? Still balance on one leg, see if you're rock steady and rock solid, but this time cross your arms over your chest to take away your hands as stabilizers. Crossing your arms on your chest is a little bit harder than letting your arms simply hang by your sides when you're balancing on one leg. And if you want to go one layer deeper, you can make it even more challenging by closing your eyes, because part of your balance system is the ability to see your environment. And if you close your eyes, it's more of a challenge when you're testing your balance. So you could do it this way. Let's say you start by standing on your right leg with your arms at your sides. You're looking straight across, and if you're rock steady, say for a count of 10, then cross your arms on your chest. Go for another 10 seconds. And if you're rock steady with your eyes open and your arms crossed, and you go for another count of 10, that's a total of 20 seconds, then close your eyes. And if you can do all three of those for a total of 30 seconds, then this is fantastic. This is a really good sign. But if not, if you're not successful at doing that, then ask yourself, where and when does your balance break down? If you don't lose your balance until you, say, cross your arms or close your eyes, that's still a problem. But it's not as bad as losing your balance with your eyes open and your arms by your side, right? And so it's progressive. I've given you three different things to progressively challenge your balance system, because some people, their balance is a little off and sometimes it's very off. So for example, the person who simply stands on one leg, eyes open and arms by their sides, where they can use them to, kind of as outriggers to balance themselves, if they lose the balance there, that's pretty bad. But if it takes all the way to crossing your arms and closing your eyes before you see some subtle shift in your balance, then that's quite a bit better, but it's still not great. It's showing some early signs. And again, a lot of times, back when I was in a brick and mortar practice, as my practice is entirely virtual now, and I was doing neurological work all the time, I would ask people, like, hey, how do you think your balance is? And most people will say, oh, my balance is really good. And then we will go through some of these simple challenges and they would be astonished, like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that I can't stand on one leg. And again, it comes back to the point that we have a very adaptive system. Your brain and your balance system is very good at adapting to these subtle changes and bringing in these compensation strategies by changing gait, posture, making sure we're looking at things. And if you see somebody walking down a hallway and they're just looking at their feet, it's because they're compensating for some kind of a balance issue, and then they need increased visual cues to be able to keep their balance. So check your right-sided balance, check your left, using this standing on one leg strategy. Another way to check your balance is by standing with your feet in what we call a tandem stance and actually walking like you're on a balance beam or on a tightrope. And we call this tandem stance and tandem walking, or heel to toe walking. And again, it's very simple. It goes like this. Number one, be safe. Make sure there's nothing around that if you bump into it, it's going to cause a problem. So first of all, it- let's talk about tandem standing or tandem stance. You stand with one foot in front of the other, such that the heel of your front foot is touching the toe of your back foot, and just stand there and check your balance. And you can do the same progression that we use for standing on your leg. So you could, for example, start with your right foot in front of your left, with your right heel touching your left toes, and keep your eyes open and your arms by your side. And if you're stable for 10 seconds, then cross your arms, keep your eyes open, but cross your arms, go for another 10 seconds. And if you're rock steady and solid, then close your eyes. And again, that's 3 levels of increasing challenge to see if and when and how your balance starts to break down. And once you do that right foot forward, then switch and do the same tandem stance test with the left foot in front of the right. Just simply repeat the process of standing with eyes open, arms by your side. Then after 10 seconds, cross your arms. And then after another 10 seconds, if you feel it's safe, then close your eyes. And remember, you have to have your heel and your toe touching for this to be a valid test. So that's 2 tests. We have the standing on one leg, we have the tandem stance, and then the final one is just basically you repeat the same heel to toe pattern, but this time you're actually going to be walking like you're on a balance beam or on a tightrope. And so each step that you take, the heel of your front foot should touch the toe of your back foot. And you should take maybe 10 steps and then turn around and then come back again. And again, use this 3-step progression. Start heel to toe walking with your eyes open, looking forward, your arms by your side. And again, if you're completely stable after maybe 5 or 6 different steps, then cross your arms and keep your eyes open. And then take another, say, 6 or 7 steps and then close your eyes. Again, if you're completely stable, rock solid, steady, this is fantastic. But if not, how soon in this progression did you break down? And that would be indicative of how much your body and your brain is compensating for changes in your balance system. And I have to say it again, be safe. Don't do this in an area where poor balance can cause you to fall and hit something. Be smart and be safe. And again, just like the single leg test, the sooner you see poor balance manifest, the worse your problem is, and the more important it is to fix it. How do you do that? Well, first, let's make sure you don't misinterpret this as specific and personal medical advice, right? I'm not diagnosing you. If you choose to do this, it's on your own. This doesn't imply any kind of doctor-patient relationship. So the first thing in terms of, hey, I've discovered my balance isn't so good doing this, the very first thing to do is do what you're not good at, right? If you feel like you need professional help, you can go to the gym, you can hire a trainer, or to be more personalized, you might want to seek out the help of a functional or a chiropractic neurologist who's trained to do this kind of work to specifically and individually assess balance and improve balance function. You can simply Google chiropractic neurologist using your zip code to try to find someone in your area. And if you can't find anyone, then a lot of times physical therapists or physiotherapists do balance assessments as well. But the point is this: if you do this testing on yourself and discover you're not good at something, do what you're not good at. So if you're okay standing on one leg, but you fail the tandem walk test, then do more tandem walking and challenge yourself at the level where your balance starts to break down. And that might be with your eyes open or closed, arms crossed or not. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. If you're not good at balancing on one leg, guess what you should do? Balance on one leg. Challenge yourself. Go for time. Try to beat your record. All right, we'll leave that there for the moment. I think those are some pretty practical things that you can do. Let's talk about strength as a predictor for longevity. And I'm realizing indeed, this is probably not going to be the last episode. I'm going to have to save the cardiorespiratory conversation for its own episode. But let's talk about strength. And there's many different ways to address your strength or assess your strength, and certainly to develop it. Strength is an interesting one because it relates not just to longevity, but also to your health span. And again, health span is having health and quality of life as you age. And the concept is very simple. Being stronger means that you can do more stuff. And in reality, the quest to develop and maintain strength and its relationship to longevity and quality of life is as much about avoiding frailty as it is anything else. And that's a real deal, right? This is all over the biomedical research, is that as we age, we become frail, we become dependent on other people, our quality of life goes down because we simply have to stop doing things because we're not strong enough. If you've ever watched an elderly person struggle to rise from a seated position, you can imagine the quality of life that they have lost because they can't do things because they're simply not strong enough. The normal trajectory for aging is to gradually do less and less as we get older and older until we find ourselves confined to our homes or perhaps even a wheelchair, eventually with someone taking care of us because we can't do it ourselves, right? This is more common than it needs to be. And in a misguided effort to express love and concern, it is very common for relatives, family members, close friends, people who love you to start doing things for you, right? Because they people who love you, as they see you struggle, they want you to take it easy. They want you to just rest. They want you to relax. And maybe on some level, that's a reward for having lived a good life and raised a good family, but it doesn't serve us as we get older. As we get older, we must be more intentional about doing things for ourselves, by ourselves, without assistance, because that is the only way that we can continue to do those things. You've heard me say before that the best predictor of aging independence is your muscle mass and your overall strength, your overall physical strength. And you're going to hear me say it again and again and again and again because it's so important. And one of the best things that you can do for yourself, I don't care how old you are, keep moving, improve your balance, increase your muscle strength, your muscle mass, improve your physical strength and your physical endurance. Now, testing global strength is more complicated than this, but let me give you a couple of things that you can do to test yourself on. The first thing is actually grip strength, right? How hard can you squeeze your hand? And this is well documented that grip strength correlates to longevity. It turns out that how strong your hands are seems to be a good predictor of longevity. Not that having strong hands makes you live longer, but if your grip is weak and it's getting weaker over time, it is a sign of frailty. So having stronger hands doesn't, again, directly increase your years, but it's a sign you have done things to avoid being frail, which does both directly and indirectly affect your quality of life as well as your longevity. So how do you test this? What's a good standard to do? Well, if you're in a clinical setting or gym, some gyms, certainly doctors will have what's called a grip dynamometer. It's just this implement that you squeeze and it measures how strong you can squeeze your hand. But one of the ways that you can do is you can test your grip by hanging on a bar, just reaching overhead, holding a bar, and then picking your feet up off the ground and see if you can hang for a minimum of 30 seconds. A minute or more is better, but you should be able to at least hang for 30 seconds. And if you can't, then you have some degree of frailty that is associated with poor muscle mass and strength. So that's one thing. That's testing your grip strength. And again, there's a lot of studies on correlation between grip strength and longevity and quality of life. But what about lower body strength? If you have access to a gym, you can test your 5-rep leg extension power using both legs, using a machine called the leg extension machine. If you are less than 40 years old, the goal is to be able to extend your legs against resistance for 5 repetitions using 90% of your body weight. And that's easy to calculate on your own, 90% of your body weight. If you're over 40 years, you get to subtract 10% for every decade you have been alive for more than 40 years. For example, if you're 50, then your goal is to extend your legs for 5 reps at 80% of your body weight. And if you're 60 years old, the goal is to extend your legs for 5 reps using 70% of your body weight. So it's a very, very simple formula, very easy to follow. Now, if you belong to a standard gym, I can guarantee you that you have access to a leg extension machine to test yourself, but I understand that not everyone has a gym membership. If you don't know what a leg extension machine is in your gym, ask someone who works at the gym to help you find it. perhaps to show you how to use it. These things are pretty safe to use, but again, be safe and be smart. If you don't have a bar to hang from and you don't have a gym to go to, then there's one test that you can do to check your overall strength, and this is called holding a goblet squat, G-O-B-L-T, like a goblet like you would drink from. It's called a goblet squat, and you want to be able to hold that for at least 30 seconds and then come back to the top. Now, this requires some technique and some proficiency. And if you don't know what a goblet squat is, then you can find examples and demonstrations on YouTube. I'll try to find one and put a link in the episode description so you can have quick access to it. But the minimum goal is to be able to hold the bottom of a goblet squat for at least 30 seconds, holding a weight that is equal to 1/3 of your body weight. So ideally, you're going to have a dumbbell that is heavy enough that you can do this, or perhaps a kettlebell that equals 1/3 of your body weight. And just to describe it, let's say you weigh 150 pounds, 1/3 of that is 50. You would hold a 50-pound dumbbell or kettlebell in front of your chest. Now, I don't mean in front as in terms of at arm's length. I also don't mean, I mean in front of your chest, not against it. So some people will do this and they'll actually rest the weight on their chest itself. Others will make the mistake of putting it fully extended, arms straight out. But you don't want to do that. You just want it maybe 4 or 5 inches in front of your chest, not touching it, but not fully extended either. And you can use that as a counterbalance as you squat down. So what you would do is you would hold the weight in that position, then you would just descend into a squat, as deep a squat as you can manage and hold. And this is why it takes technique and proficiency. But you will want to hold that position in the bottom for 30 seconds, or as long as you can, minimum 30 seconds, and then to be able to squat up and stand up under control. This is not easy. So if you're thinking, I can't hold 1/3 of my body weight in front of my chest, then you've got something to work on. You need to increase your strength. And if you're thinking, well, I can't get into a squat because I'm too stiff, let alone hold the bottom position for 30 seconds, then you have things to work on. These are things you probably could have done 10, 15, 20 years ago, and now you can't. What is that telling you? It's something that you need to fix if that is indeed the case. Now, again, there are many ways to test your grip strength, your lower body strength, your overall body strength. These are just some of the common ways to do it. And I'm sure, again, you can find more options and some good examples and some demonstrations online. This episode is all about creating awareness and getting you to realize frailty is a real thing. We lose things little by little, year after year, decade after decade, until all of a sudden we're like, what the heck has happened? I am not the same person I used to be. The bottom line is this: balance matters. Mobility matters. Strength matters. And if you're concerned about longevity and lifespan and quality of life as you age, you must know where you stand in these capacities and these capabilities. Do you need to work on balance? Do you need to work on strength? Do you need to work on both? Figure it out and make a commitment. It doesn't take much effort to improve things. And even small improvements can bring good protection. You just need to be aware that you have a problem and you need to commit to improving it in yourself. Now, in the next and the final episode, I am going to introduce you to perhaps the 2 most important aspects of your cardiorespiratory fitness. And these are great predictors of longevity as well as quality of life. And that is what we call your zone 2 capacity as well as your VO2 max. So stay tuned. We'll be doing that in the next episode. Thanks for listening. And I hope to see you again right here on the Inflammation Nation.
Thanks for listening to Inflammation Nation. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. Be the first to know when a new episode drops so you can stay on top of your game. It also helps others like you find the answers they need. You can use the links in the episode description to check out Dr. Noseworthy's self-learning programs for thyroid, detox, and gut health. Or you can submit a question for the podcast and even reach out to Dr. Noseworthy directly.